Utilizing this framework, governments can do three things. They can reform, they can regulate, and they can liberalize. And these are not mutually exclusive, but complementary actions. Often, in order for reforms in a sector to be effective, new regulatory frameworks are required, and the GATS totally recognizes the importance of regulation. Sector-wise, greater openness to trade in services can also contribute to addressing major challenges of today: the fight against climate change, protection of the environment, greater energy efficiency. These are just some of the emerging sectors which deserve the attention of negotiators as compared to the sectors which were traded. Thanks a lot. So, strengthening the GATS foundation in the round is therefore critical to keeping our economies on the path towards global recovery. And even though regional or bilateral trade agreements increasingly include services, binding commitments under the GATS remain the best way to give credibility to reform and to support the international opening of services. And I don't think there is any serious substitute for commitments underpinned by multilateral agreements. Now, those of you who are keen followers of the trading system will have noticed that on negotiation of the round, I have sounded a slightly different beat at the end of July. At that time, what I reported to the General Council was that I said that we had a new dynamic meeting, and that the various sections of the orchestra in Geneva are not only tuning their instruments, but slowly starting to play from the same music sheet. Now, I know that it's not often that the Doha negotiations are likened to a symphony, and I recognize it's a bit of a hearing analogy, but there are indeed many similarities. As you know, conventional symphony has a four-movement structure, at least in the classical style. Fast, slow, dance-like, fast. And sometimes booms or interrupt the harmony, and in more modern variations, discordant notes jar the ear, but all parts, when heard as a whole, are needed. Now, the DDA may well be an unusual symphony, and further fine-tuning and harmony is certainly required, but when all the principal sections of the orchestra, from agriculture to industrial products, services, trade facilitation, fisheries subsidies come together, the performance will certainly have been worth the wait. Coming back to the classical symphony configuration, symphony ends with the same allegro or sonata which it began with. And as you know, the services negotiation preceded the launch of the round, and if we keep to that score, it will feature prominently at the end. At the moment, a number of bilateral contacts as well as small groups are rehearsing to bring concordance to the sounds that we are starting to hear. We should give space and time for this new dynamic to mature. All of these inputs will have to be fed into the multilateral process and help bring the engagement to an equal music. And somewhere around the end of October should be a good time to evaluate our progress and take stock how these rehearsals have been going. Overall, the services negotiations have progressed as well as can be expected given the impasse on a few other remaining issues. That being said, important milestones were registered in 2008 with the Civilian Conference, which showed that members were willing and able to move forward in this area when their mindset is that the right conditions for a breakthrough are in place. And for further progress to be made in services, we need the other parts of the negotiations to move to, and in fact, all these elements need to be woven together so that the contours of the final market access package can appear. But one thing is crystal clear is that in this final package, services, whether on the market access side or in the domestic regulation side, will have to figure prominently. More specifically on the market access side of the negotiation, we've seen some new thinking recently, some tentatives to find new, more creative negotiating configurations, and these ideas should be now actively pursued if we are to make progress. Looking at the long picture, a lot has happened since the services negotiations were launched in 2000. Many countries have unilaterally opened services sector to competition and have simultaneously ensured that proper regulations are in place. And with now quite some time of experience, it might be the right time to bind this opening in WTO. Binding this opening would ensure greater predictability, greater security, the value of which has been proven during the recent crisis, and of course, getting there implies each country, each delegation has full knowledge of existing market access opening in each of your economies. But as I have already said, there are many emerging sectors which are now essential to help country combat climate change, preserve the environment, ensure greater energy efficiency, or to adjust to this changing patterns of world trade with global production chains triggered by the dissemination of information technologies. Some of these sectors are even now part of bilateral trade agreement discussions. Should we not think of opening up these sectors as a priority in the ongoing Doha negotiations? So, adding these suggestions, binding existing market access, focusing on the modern age of services would result in what I believe could be considered as a minimum level of ambition for the round. Now, of course, up to numbers to decide, but in my view, such a broadly defined course of actions would greatly help negotiators to mobilize the forces